All right. Well, welcome to the end. What a journey. What a journey this has been. I'm sure it's been a journey for you. I know it's been a journey for me, putting together all of this information for you so that you have a powerful Christology as you exit this adventure and you really can go forward into your own circles and fight the battles that need to be fought, because there is no shortage of apostasy and heresy and blasphemy in today's world, and it's only going to get worse. As we move into the final stages of history, more and more deception will come out. Who knows how it's all going to be wrapped up together with this whole sacred name thing, but we have to keep our ears open and our eyes open as well. You know, the whole Nehemiah Gordon revealing, quote unquote, God's name, Jehovah, with all this third temple stuff happening. I'm curious how it's all going to be integrated, but at the very least, it's just a way to take you off the narrow road into apostasy. That's really at the very least. We know the Jews need to convert because the world will marvel after the beast. We know that Messianic Judaism is the bridge for them to have a charismatic revival in the Middle East. I've covered these things in my news updates, in my Great Delusion series. So maybe all of these things will come together meaningfully. Or maybe sacred name is just there to, send people into legalism and cause confusion and apostasy. Who knows how it's all going to come together? But we know that it's of the devil, for sure. It's deception. I see way too many people duped by these things and being deceived away from the truth, from the gospel, from the profound truth that Yahweh is the one who came in Jesus' life. And you're looking at Jesus, or you're looking at Yahweh, and Yahweh's the one who died for you, which is profound. So profound. I mean, it's just forever profound, forever profound. But the devil doesn't want you to have that profound relationship with Christ. He doesn't want you to marvel at Jesus. So he sends you to the left or to the right, and he deceives you with so many things. I hope this has been edifying for you. I hope it's strengthened your faith. I hope that it's strengthened your Christology. I hope that it's strengthened your discernment in using original languages and linguistic tools and history, so you understand how to really dig into a topic. In this final part, I want to wrap up with just a few little things like Yahweh and DNA and so on, and the lanolin cross, and we're going to do just a quick summary as well for your convenience, so you have a summary of all the points, and we'll look at some claims like I said, that people use. They're viral claims on the internet. So the first one is Yahweh in DNA. So let's pull this up. Where is it at? Okay, here we go. This is now, again, that Dan McClellan guy again. Remember, he's a skeptic, but he has some important things to say that we can take from. So this is our God's name and identity written into our DNA. Let's see.
The DNA molecule is a double helix consisting of two major segmented strands that spiral clockwise.
All right, let's see it.
These strands are connected by sulfur bridges like the rungs in a ladder.
Gonna stop you right there. There is no such thing as a sulfur bridge in DNA. The nucleotides are connected by hydrogen bonds, and there are no sulfur bridges anywhere. That's entirely made up.
These bridges are not evenly spaced along the molecule, but they do have a specific pattern. There's a bridge, then 10 segments later there's another one, then 5 segments later another, followed by 6 segments and another, then 5 segments, there's another bridge.
So because there is no such thing as a sulfur or sulfuric bridge in the DNA molecule, there is no such segmentation either.
This 10-5-6-5 pattern is then repeated over and over again for the entire length of the molecule.
So even if this pattern of segmentation existed, which it does not, I am curious about why we start with the 10, because if it just repeated infinitely, then it's totally arbitrary where we decide to start this repeating pattern and where we decide to end this repeating pattern.
That's an important point. Again, this is one of those viral things like, oh, Yahweh's in the DNA, and it's like, yes, there is evidence of God's creation everywhere, but we have to learn to argue more effectively. The first person, the elder gentleman reading from this thing, you can just tell he's just trying to be genuine, and he found something that he thinks is really glorifying to God. But we have to be more discerning because, again, At the very least, this just discredits your position when you're using these types of things as primary evidence for the Bible, for God, and for things like that. At the worst, it's deceiving you into believing things without researching them. And the devil trains people to think this way so that increasingly more worse deceptions can be played upon these people. Eventually, oh, well, what about this? Well, you're not going to question anything, so you're probably going to accept things very easily after going through all these little viral things. And so eventually, we might turn to the sacred name movement. You might become a Unitarian. You might do something that, would qualify as apostasy, but you're not really going to question it because you're so used to just accepting things on face value. Does that make sense? That's what we want to avoid.
This is particularly interesting when viewed with the Hebrew language. In Hebrew, the letters correspond to numbers, since there are no distinct numbers like we have in English. In Hebrew, the number 10 is the letter Yod.
Remember, this is Masoretic Hebrew too, so also wrong.
Or Y. The number 5 is the letter He or H, and the number 6 is the letter Vav or W. Therefore, the pattern that is found in the DNA is Yod He Vav He. That is the way the Hebrews wrote or spelled the name God revealed himself with. So God's very name is found repeatedly in the structure of the DNA molecule. In other words, every DNA molecule in every living organism bears the imprint of the name of Yahweh, the God of the Bible.
So the numerical values are accurate, and the fact that that is the Tetragrammaton, the divine name, is accurate. But again, none of this has any actual relationship whatsoever to anything within the structure of DNA.
But there's more.
All right, let's see that too.
Like the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, Hebrew is a pictorial language. The letters represent images or concepts.
No, it absolutely does not. Now,
This is the part that I was telling you with hand behold, nail behold type of thing.
centuries after the Bible was written, there were some mystical strands of Jewish tradition that began to import a lot of mystical significance into the characters and what they believed they truly represented in order to be able to read a lot more mystical significance into the text and renegotiate its meaning. But that is something that developed centuries after the Hebrew Bible was written. Now, Hebrew has always been based on an alphabetic script. Now, that script descends from Egyptian hieroglyphs that had a more ideographic and syllabic function, but by the time Hebrew gets a hold of it, it had become purely acrophonic. What that means is that each character just represents or indexes or symbolizes a sound. Now, the sound that it symbolizes is the sound that starts the word that the character looks like. So the Hebrew character bait descends from a specific depiction of a house, because in Northwest Semitic languages, the word for house was bait. And so the bait indexes the sound b. It does not import in every single usage or in any usage the entire concept of the house or anything associated with the concept of a house.
Does that make sense? So basically, it's a very unique, it's pictographic in the sense that it's pictures, but the pictures are designed to remind you of the sound. They're not designed to be like hieroglyphics in the sense that there's pictures of the meaning of something. They're pictures of the sound of something, so you know, oh, that's B, that's B, because that looks like a house, and we say bite is the house. Bite is the word for house, so that letter is always starting with a b. It's not, you're not saying house when you're writing that letter. Does that make sense? That's what he's saying. You're not saying house when you're writing that symbol. You're saying the sound. It's an acrophonic relationship.
It just indexes the sound b. It was based on a drawing of a house, but it just indicates this is the sound b.
Specifically, the Yod or Y represents behold, the H or He represents a hand.
So it sounds like this creator has mixed up the Yod and the He. It is the Yod that descends from a pictograph of an arm and a hand. The He descends from a pictograph of a person with upraised arms. And when it was ideographic, the hay, or the pictograph of the person with the upraised arms, represented an interjection of despair or of joy or of immediacy, like ha, oh, hey, something like that. It didn't specifically mean behold, but additionally, by the time it gets into Hebrew, it just represented the sounds those words started with. So yod was a Y consonant and hey was an H consonant.
And the vav or W represents a nail.
So the vav descended from hieroglyphs that represented either a mace or maybe a hook that you would hang curtains on. It definitely didn't specifically refer to a nail, and by the time it gets into Hebrew, it indexed a sound, usually a w, but perhaps sometimes a v sound, or it could be used to represent a U quality vowel.
Combining all of this information, what we can say categorically is that every DNA molecule proclaims the name of God, but also identifies who that God is. It is saying, behold the nails in my hands.
It's not saying any such thing whatsoever. Even if we accepted those etymological origins for those characters, you would still need to rearrange the order. You would need to make something singular plural. You would need to add pronominal suffixes. You would need to create an entire grammatical structure out of what would be nonsensical combinations of words. But that's not what those characters mean, and Yod-He Vav-He is not found in the structure of DNA in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. This is all pure and utter nonsense.
So this is a linguist speaking to you. And of course, there is some research that people bring up. This is from the Natural Library of Medicine, nucleic acids research. And the title of the study is DNA Backbone Interactions Impact the Sequence Specificity of DNA Sulfur Binding Domains. Not sulfur bridges, sulfur binding domains, revelations from structural analyses. Say, oh, look, DNA does have these things. Well, not so much. I mean, if you look into this, like if you type in sulfur binding domains, I tried to read this, to be honest with you, it's extremely complicated. I can't tell left or right of it. But if you look at images of these things, DNA is exceedingly complicated, especially when you're dealing with enzymes and the structure of proteins and things. It's not as simplistic as, let's see if we can get one. It doesn't want to. Shoo, leave me alone. There we go. Nope, that didn't do it. You see, these things are just very complicated structures. So there's no sulfur binding bridges. There's no sulfur bridges. There's no such thing. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that suddenly our proof for the Bible goes out the window. This is the reason why these things need to be exposed. And I'm not trying to, rain on your parade or anything, but the reality is that when you're using these things and you're relying on these instead of hard facts like what does the Bible say about itself? What does archaeology say? Using things in context. That is how you should be thinking about the Bible, not trying to sniff out these viral things that really, they're easily discredited by people who are experts in the field. And again, this guy has a bias. Sure, he's not a Christian. I don't think he's even a faithful Jew. I think he's just a secular guy. I could be wrong, but at the very least, he's a critical scholar. And you have to have a good response to these critical scholars. Because like you saw for the previous thing where he talked about, supposedly God losing a battle to Chemosh, he was wrong because he's not reading in context. But that was a much more nuanced conversation. These types of things with sulfur bridges, it's easy. You're easy fodder for these people because they're very intelligent and they can refute you very easily because they can go into the Hebrew grammar, into history, into, even medical stuff if needed. And so ultimately we need to not use these things as arguments because you have much better ones. Learn to dig deep in the word rather than doing superficial things like this, because this is exactly what's happening. If there were sulfur bridges, even if there were such structures, it's arbitrary to start at a certain point. And he made a really good point. It's arbitrary. Even if it was 10.565, which again, it's Masoretic Hebrew, original Paleo Hebrew did not have number values for letters, so that doesn't work. This is Masoretic gematria, mystical stuff going on. And the rabbis are laughing at Goyim that are doing their own gematria with their own letters. It's really silly. So we have to stay away from this kind of stuff. Original Hebrew did not have numbers. It was sound-based. It was pictorial, but the pictures are supposed to remind you of sounds. So this, let's see, I think we watched a video on this. Yeah, wait, let me see. I think this is also on the hand behold, nail behold thing.
Yahweh means I am that I am. But did you know that there's an incredible meaning hidden in the Hebrew?
So two things here. First, God's name does not mean I am that I am. That phrase comes from Exodus 3:14, which presents an alternative name for God, Echya Asher Echya, which is a complete sentence which uses the verbal root haya in a conjugated first-person form, spelled aleph he, yod he, which is different from the tetragrammaton, which is yod he, vav he, and it is a bit of a folk etymology intended to link the tetragrammaton with the verbal root haya.
Well, it's not a folk etymology. It exists in the oldest Ketephinome scrolls that we have, and we have confirmation that even the Egyptians associated Yahweh with the Israelites. So, and Moses wrote the Pentateuch, and Moses wrote the Tetragrammaton in the early first 5 books of the Bible. So you can tell the bias coming through, but there's also important things that he says that we have to listen to.
To be, and if that folk etymology is correct, then Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, would be a third person, a conjugation of that root. Second thing, all right, let's see it.
The 4 Hebrew letters that make up his name are Yud, He, Vav, He, which in ancient early Hebrew were represented by pictures or symbols.
So this is flatly false. There has never been a time in the history of writing the Hebrew language during which the characters of its alphabet were pictographic or ideographic or even syllabic. Hebrew has always used an acrophonic alphabet, one that it derived from the Phoenician alphabet. And acrophonic means that each character in the alphabet simply represents a sound. Now, that sound is the sound that starts off a word that in earlier iterations of the alphabet were associated with the image represented by the character. But by the time it gets into Phoenician and then into Hebrew, it is no longer associated with the ideas of that pictograph. It's just associated with the sound, which is why the characters, as you get deeper into the Phoenician and the Hebrew alphabets, look less and less like the pictographs from the early alphabetic script.
Yod symbolizes the arm or the hand.
So Yod does not represent the arm or the hand. It represents the consonant Y. The character in the alphabet, however, descends from the combination of 2 hieroglyphic characters. One represented a hand with the curved palm, and the other represented the forearm and the hand.
He signifies a revelation and can also mean behold.
He does not signify a revelation or behold. It just indexes the consonant we refer to as H. It descends from an Egyptian hieroglyph that represents a person with upraised arms. However, it does not represent a revelation or behold in this early pre-alphabetic usage either. It represents an interjection of lament, of joy, or of immediacy.
Vav represents a nail or a peg.
Vav does not represent a nail or a peg. It represented the consonant W, and in later periods, V. The association with a nail or a peg actually is only found in the use of the word in the plural in Exodus, where it refers to hooks that held curtains. But that is a secondary association, because when it was being used ideographically, it did not represent a nail or a peg. It represented a mace.
And He again signifies another revelation. When you put these together, you get a message that truly blows your mind. Behold the hand, behold the nail. Or, the hand reveals, the nail reveals. Jesus is the manifestation of Yahweh in the flesh and is crucified on a cross with nails in his hands, which reveals the plan and covenant of Yahweh.
This is absolutely not how Hebrew works, and even if it were, it would not mean this. This is just something that a Christian made up so that they could superimpose Jesus upon the Hebrew language. And this is the text I was sharing if you'd like to go learn more.
So obviously there's that, and we have to be again, he has some bias. Obviously, he's very committed to fighting against these videos. And to some degree, again, God will use all these things for the good. God will use these things for the good to strengthen his elect, to give you discernment. And who knows, right? People who are yet to come to salvation, maybe they will see one of these viral videos and repent and cry and come to Jesus. So God uses all things for the good. However, from our perspective, Fennec Fox's, it's important to remember when you're arguing with critics, especially very intelligent people that like to go into history and so on, or Jews, or anybody who's basically challenging the Bible in that sense, at least the Christian interpretation of the Bible, the pictures do form a story about Jesus if you're looking at just the pictures. But how much of that are we superimposing with our expectations? I'm 50-50 on it. I don't like to base my beliefs on things that aren't substantiated, especially things that have very strong counter-arguments. There's a strong counter-argument against this. Now, could it be that there's a hidden message there that God intended to reveal Christ in his name? It's interesting. It's a really fascinating thing that the pictures themselves do seem to suggest that narrative. However, it's not something that you can argue reliably, especially again with people who are Hebrew scholars or Jewish or any kind of, that kind of part of town where they have history and details and things that they can pull out and refute you very easily. So we have to refine our argument. These things are interesting, but they're not the basis of your belief, and they shouldn't be. They should be something to look at. Oh, that's kind of cool. It's interesting, but not super left or right with it. With the DNA stuff, I'm not convinced. There's no sulfur bridges. There has to be more convincing evidence. That is just a generalization. We're gonna read now with laminin, which is another thing and that's come up with a viral thing. Again, to me, to be honest with you, what I see these things as is the enemy is making people just indulge in their flesh, in the sense like low-hanging fruit. Anything to get you off from actually engaging God's word and doing research and learning to interpret. These things are just there to lust of the eyes. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, look, it says it's about Jesus. Just designed to make you believe things easily without researching, so that you can be deceived with things like the charismatic movement, with the thing that is sweeping the world, and all the lukewarm people that have no discernment whatsoever are going to get wrapped up in it. That's the way I see these kinds of things. At the very minimum, or I should say at the very maximum, they could be interesting, like with the pictures of the Yod He Vav He. But again, the actual meaning that those people wrote down, it wasn't to make pictures, it was to remind them of the sounds of the name. So there's that. But at the maximum, it could be just something interesting to look at. At the minimum, it's there to distract you and to basically take you off from really indulging in heavier research. This is from Reasons to Believe. Is the laminin cross evidence for a creator? As I interact with people on social media and travel around the country to speak on the biochemical evidence for a creator, I am frequently asked to comment on laminin. The people who mention this protein are usually quite excited, convinced that its structure provides powerful scientific evidence for the Christian faith. Unfortunately, I don't agree. And this guy is an expert, and he goes and talks about biochemical stuff and how it relates to the creator. And he's telling you, I don't agree. Motivating this unusual question is the popularized claim of the well-known Christian pastor that laminin structure provides physical evidence that the God of the Bible created human beings and also sustains our lives. While I wholeheartedly believe God did create and sustain human life, laminin's apparent cross shape does not make the case. Laminin is one of the key components of the basal lamina, a thin-like sheet structure that surrounds cells in animal tissue. The basal lamina is part of the extracellular matrix. This structure consists of a meshwork of fibrous proteins and polysaccharides secreted by the cells. It forms the space between the cells and animal tissue. The extracellular matrix carries out a wide range of functions that include providing anchor points and support for cells. By the way, if you've ever studied this stuff, like the fascia and the extracellular matrix, any kind of biochemistry or biology, you don't need to find shapes of things or, pictures of things. You can just see the profound level of engineering at such a microscopic scale. It's beyond comprehension how all these things can come to be without an intelligent mind. It's just beyond. So anyway, those things reveal the glory of God by default. But moving on, laminin is a relatively large protein made of 3 different protein subunits that combine to form a T-shaped structure when the flexible rod-like regions of laminin are fully extended. Each of the 4 arms of laminin contain sites that allow this biomolecule to bind to other laminin molecules, other proteins like collagen and large polysaccharides. Laminin also provides a binding site for proteins called integrins, which are located on the cell membrane. So this is what it looks like, and people say, look, it's the cross, and therefore, the Bible is true. And again, it's just one of those things where the devil wants you to use these arguments so that he can discredit you. You see the point? So you have to be smarter than this. Even though this is so, oh my gosh, it's a cross, it must be. These things are designed to feed your desire to look for low-hanging fruit. Laminin's architecture and binding sites make this protein ideally suited to interact with other proteins and polysaccharides to form a network called the basal reticulum and to anchor cells to its biochemical scaffolding. The basal reticulum helps hold cells together to form tissues and in turn helps cement the tissue to connective tissues. The cross shape of laminin and the role it plays in holding tissues together has prompted the claim that this biomolecule provides scientific support for passages such as Colossians 1 verses 15 through 17 and shows how the God of the Bible must have made humans and continues to sustain them. I would caution Christians against using this argument, quote-unquote argument. I see a number of problems with it, and so do many skeptics. That's the issue. That's how the snake gets you. First, the cross shape is a simple structure found throughout nature, so it's probably not a good idea to attach too much significance to laminin's shape. The T configuration makes laminin ideally suited to connect proteins to each other and cells to the basal reticulum. This is undoubtedly the reason for its structure. Secondly, the cross shape of laminin is an idealized illustration of the molecule. Portraying complex biomolecules in simplified ways is a common practice among biochemists. This is, by the way, the same argument with this whole DNA sulfur bridge thing. When you oversimplify, these molecules are incredibly complex, and when they move and they change shape and position and orientation, you can't just simplify and say, oh, this is how it is, just this nice straight little line or whatever. Depicting laminin in this extended form helps scientists visualize and catalog the binding sites along its 4 arms. This configuration should not be interpreted to represent its actual shape in biological systems. Very important. In the basal reticulum, laminin adopts all sorts of shapes that bear no resemblance to a cross. In fact, it's much more common to observe laminin in a swastika configuration than in a cross-like one. Even electron micrographs of isolated laminin molecules that appear cross-shaped may be misleading. Their shape is like an artifact of sample preparation. I have seen other electron micrographs that show laminin adopting a variety of twisted shapes that, again, bear no resemblance to a cross. Finally, laminin is not the only molecule holding things together. This is the argument. I forget which pastor it was, but one of these megachurch pastors was like, oh, laminin, he had this whole presentation on it, and laminin holds things together, and that's the cross, and he made all this meaning. Again, we make stories so quickly, but are they true? Are they reasonable, and can they be argued? Of course, in this case, it can't, because you have a Christian who's an expert on this telling you that you shouldn't be doing this. A number of other proteins and polysaccharides are also indispensable components of the basal reticulum. None of these molecules is cross-shaped. As I argue in my book, The Cell's Design, the structure and operation of biochemical systems provides some of the most potent support for a creator's role in fabricating living systems. Absolutely. Just look at a diagram of a cell and it'll blow your mind. Instead of pointing to superficial features of biochemical, such as the cross-shaped architecture of laminin, there are many more substantive ways to use biochemistry to argue for the necessity of a creator and for the value he places on human life. As a case in point, the salient characteristics of biochemical systems identically match those features we would recognize immediately as evidence for the work of a human design engineer. The close similarity between the biochemical systems and the devices produced by human designers logically compels this conclusion. Life's most fundamental processes and structures stem from the work of an intelligent, intentional agent. When Christians invest the effort to construct a careful case for the Creator, skeptics and seekers find it difficult to deny the powerful evidence from biochemistry and other areas of science for God's existence. That's right. It's about edifying those who are seekers and responding to skeptics. But when you're basing your arguments on superficial things, like what we just talked about with all these things, what happens is you're easily discredited. And as a result, the gospel is diminished. Of course, God will accomplish all his purpose, but the point is, from our perspective, we need to be better. We need to be better. And I'm guilty of it too. I thought the hand behold, nail behold, oh, look, the pictures. And I looked at the pictures, and of course, eyes of the flesh, you see only what things without really doing a deeper dive to realize that those pictures are really just artifacts of the hieroglyphic system that are designed to elicit a sound in your mind. They're not designed to communicate pictures. They're designed to communicate the sound of the words, which is a totally different way of writing language than what we're used to. So, conclusion, creation reveals God's glory and genius. You don't need to find, these superficial things. You just need to look. It's everywhere you look, folks. You can't have creation without a creator. There is, however, an element of mysticism in the things that you allow to be pulled into. This is all mysticism. The stuff that I showed you with the sulfur bridge, with the hand behold, nail behold, and the laminin, all this stuff is mysticism. Oh, look, it's like this, and we put the Hebrew number there, and so it's just mystery religion stuff. And of course, these are well-meaning people that want to reveal God's glory. I get it. I get the sentiment, but you're being deceived by mysticism. This is mysticism, trying to find secret knowledge and patterns and so on and so forth. And deceitful spirits are told to us that they'll be in the last days, they'll deceive many, and they attract people to these things to make them rely on their flesh and on the obvious rather than digging deeper and building their beliefs on evidence. The spiritual war is often indirect, conditioning you slowly to think a certain way. And the what's the word I'm looking for? The requirement, the prerequisite for you being deceived into apostasy is for you to not think critically. Does that make sense? That's the prerequisite. If you don't think critically, you don't have discernment, then yeah, you're easy fodder for the devil. But if you're kind of on the fence, then you have to be lulled into sleep with all these things that make you don't really think. Oh, that's cool, and you don't really question it. And you're training yourself to base your belief on these things. And eventually, there's something more serious that comes into your mind. The more you accept fleshly interpretations, the easier you are to be fooled with other things that are more serious. We have to be Bereans, little foxes with big ears. Watch my video on that so that you're not easily snagged by these things and you're not easily discredited. Because if you're in a debate with somebody and you're trying to present them the gospel and you present them something like this laminin thing and they say, well, no, that's been refuted. Look, and now what are you going to do? Again, God will accomplish his purpose and every failure will be used for the good. But for our own sake, right, from your own position, it's good to be strong in your faith and to know what things are there to be argued. Like the Soleb inscription from 3,000 years ago plus that says that the nomadic Shasu of Yahweh was in Egypt, which is north of Egypt, which is very, very interesting. So I'm guilty of it too. Don't feel too bad. Just realize that these things are left and right and they're designed to distract you. Now let's do a quick summary of this whole thing. There's great deception by the enemy surrounding God's sacred name in the Bible. The enemy does this as usual with dualities. Either reject God is sovereign and go the way of the wind through atheism, New Age, Gnosticism. God is, the Old Testament God is evil, he's pagan, whatever else, right? Or drive people into legalism, Unitarianism, Hebrew roots, Torah keepers, that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter, either left or right. That doesn't matter. Just go off the narrow road. 100% of the time, these people always mix truth with error, as you hopefully have seen through this entire adventure. They mix history with fiction. They take things out of context. They generalize. They create many logical fallacies. This, like non sequiturs, it doesn't follow, category errors, all kinds of things we've talked about. God has many names in the Bible. The rabbinic system gradually replaced God's name, Yahweh, with titles like Adonai and Elohim and so on, and made it illegal to pronounce the name because of superstitions. The name was relatively lost through translations and cultures and all the occupations that were happening with the Romans, with the Greeks, and so on. Now, as far as pronunciation, God's name is pronounced Yahweh, all vowels. If you were to spell it phonetically, it would be I-A-O-U-E-I, Yahweh, emphasis on the second. There's no heavy H. It's not Yahuwah or any other Yahushua or Yahowashi or whatever, Yehovah or whatever other versions we saw. We know this for several reasons. We know Josephus testifies as 4 vowels. We know the early church records the name also as all vowels in the same sequence. And we know early Septuagint manuscripts show the same vocalization, at least for the first couple of vowels. Iota, alpha, omega, ayao, yao, Yahweh, yao. So that's pretty consistent. We also know rabbinic sources can't be trusted for several reasons. Yehovah is actually the opposite of Yahweh. It's backwards, i.e. satanic. Because if the vowels are Yehovah, right? Yehovah, E-O-A, but the actual word is pronounced Yahweh, Yahweh, you're doing it backwards. Do you see how it's totally backwards? It's really fascinating that that's the case. Although I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. Rabbis after Jesus conspired to change the scriptures, that's very well documented, to create a magical alphabet for their Kabbalistic agenda, to bring in their false world millennial reign and their false Christ. See my Masoretic episode, see my Jews documentary. And of course, the person putting this forward, who is Nehemiah Gordon, rejects Jesus, even though he claims to be a Karaite Jew, which would lead you to Jesus if you truly were a Karaite Jew. And he appeals to rabbinic traditions, which doesn't make any sense. But anyway, we also answered several serious challenges and accusations to this whole sacred name thing. The first one was, is Yahweh a pagan god? The answer, of course, is no. Yahweh is not a pagan god, because this is just garbled history being presented to you with half-truths and rejecting context, rejecting God's word, rejecting to let the Bible speak for itself, but rather taking things out of context. And of course, there's a lot of misinformation. Apostate Israelites worshipped idols as Yahweh, and they also apostatized. They also appropriated things, like faithful Israelites, like David, appropriated things from, like Rahab, from mythologies, the old serpent and things like that, as a way, they appropriated it to God as a way to show that God is the one who is sovereign. God is the one that deserves the praise that these pagan countries and nations were giving to their false gods. So you had these two things that were happening. Apostate Israelites worshiping Yahweh through a counterfeit religion, which they do today as well. Catholicism, the institutionalized church model in general, especially religions that are very works-based, like Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Mormonism, all these harlot daughters. It's all the same thing. You're worshiping Yahweh in a way that Yahweh has not told you to worship him. You're trying to do it your own way. Cain-level worship. From the very beginning, folks, you see the distinction between God's elect, the true church, and the counterfeit church. Do you see? Cain and Abel. Abel goes the way that God asked to be doing. Basically, he's offering the sacrifice and he's giving it his all. Now, of course, it's not what you do that saves you, but the point is that Abel's heart was in it. He had a heart for God. Cain wanted to do what he wanted to do. So he tried to approach God in his own way and doing his own thing. And of course, that's counterfeit worship. That pattern has been throughout time. And with the Old Testament, you had counterfeit worship with Israelites worshiping Yahweh as, with the golden calf and with the sun worship and all this stuff that was happening in the temple. You also had faithful Israelites appropriating pagan themes in their psalms to God and saying, look, God is the one who, smote Rahab and cut her into pieces, not Marduk. This is the point. Bow down to him, you nations. It was a way of worshiping God. People who are uneducated in the scriptures look at these two examples that I just listed to you and say, well, you see, God, Yahweh must be a pagan deity that somehow just made it to the forefront out of all these pantheons and, everybody started worshiping Yahweh, which of course is just nonsense. It's total nonsense. But this is the problem. People don't trust the scriptures and they're devoured by the devil. Now, the next one we looked at is whether Yahweh was an occult name, and that's because people see the Tetragrammaton being used by New Age, Kabbalah, witchcraft, so on and so forth. And so that therefore they say, well, Yahweh must be an occult name somehow. It must be an evil name or something like that. And of course, this is an example of a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. It doesn't follow that people are appropriating these things and being deceived by the devil and creating counterfeits, that the original is evil. Yes, the occult and Kabbalists and the New Agers and the witches and so on, they use these things to try to manifest reality. But as Christians, we know that God is sovereign. We know that God is sovereign over all things, so whatever happens, God has allowed for his purpose. Again, the reprobate are allowed to be deceived, to reveal God's justice. And the elect, whoever they happen to be doing this New Age witchcraft kind of stuff, mysticism, are allowed to wander into these things so that when they're saved, they can give glory to God and expose them. I was involved in the New Age. I used to burn sage and do rituals and I'm guilty of that stuff. Now I expose it. So of course, the elect are allowed to wander into these things so that they can reveal God's glory as a savior. So either judge or savior, doesn't matter. Either way, it's for God's glory. And that's the thing you need to remember, that on the other side of the darkness and evil is God's glory at the end. And that's the thing you can't forget. Now, the last challenge to this was probably the worst, which of course is also the most nonsensical, which is Yahweh Satan? This is an accusation by very, very ignorant people that twist the Old Testament, and they are basically Marcionites, Gnostics, that believe that the Old Testament God is evil and could be even Satan. But of course, they're very easy to refute. They don't understand God's justice, God's righteousness. They don't believe in a sovereign God. And so obviously, if you don't believe in a sovereign God, then whatever you do believe in is going to be a counterfeit. Zechariah 3 immediately refutes this objection because Satan and Yahweh are distinguished as two different beings. Yahweh also intercedes on behalf of mankind and redeems man and also rebukes Satan. So therefore, Yahweh cannot be Satan because Yahweh is rebuking Satan. And we also looked at other verses that this pattern overall is taking things out of context. Like all those verses we looked at in that meme with the seven spirits of Yahweh, supposedly, or whatever. Just absolute, most of those were taken, all of them were taken out of context, but I should say a few, what I wanted to say is a few of them didn't even apply, like the one about the spirit of jealousy. That wasn't even about Yahweh. That was just about what happens in the case somebody gets jealous in the case of an adultery. How do you handle that? Nothing to do with Yahweh sending a spirit of jealousy. So you can see that these people don't even proofread their own work, which is just so sad that, again, to me, that people believe this stuff with such low rigor, and then you challenge them on it and they refuse to be corrected. So the point is that someone who believes these things, if you run into them, good luck. It's going to take an act of God. And who knows, maybe God will work through you to change this person's mind, but they are very long gone in deception if you believe something like that. Now, the last section, I believe here, was on Yeshua. Of course, is Jesus' Hebrew name. Lots of wild theories about that. Jesus' Hebrew name was pronounced Yeshua, or Yehoshua, probably the older version, Yehoshua, but it's Yeshua. There's also a guttural on the shin sound, the sh. I don't really know how to do that in English, but it's not Yehoshua or Yahushua or Yahawashi or whatever else. It's not Yah in the beginning. It's Yeh. It's because, again, Yah is at the beginning now. God's name is at the beginning. So it changes the vowel from an ah to an eh, which is really not a short eh, but a long a sound. It's a diphthong. Yeshua. Of course, the Greek version of that is Jesus, which was translated by faithful Jews, and it was a very popular name, and people understood, and Jewish scholars like Philo attested to the fact that Jesus means God saves. So there was no confusion for Jewish people living from the 3rd century to, the 2nd century, by the time the rabbinic system started to rebel and declare two powers in heaven a heresy, stop naming people Jesus, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for a couple hundred years, the Jews it was a very popular name, and nobody thought anything differently of that. So, what matters more than anything is having a relationship with Jesus, not pronouncing his Hebrew name. If you want to pronounce his Hebrew name, then go for it. But you don't have to. And that's the beauty that we have of a relationship with Christ. Sacred name legalism pulls you away from profound truths, pulls you away from digging into the word and researching and really knowing why you believe what you believe, into a superficial, lust of the eyes, poorly, strung together hodgepodge of belief system that can deceive you into many directions. Like I said at the beginning, this is connected to a lot of different things. Whether it's the serpent seed, two creations narrative, anything's game for the devil at that point if you have allowed these beliefs to come into your mind, because it's just very poor hermeneutics and it's poor way of judging things. So that's about it, folks. That's about it. I hope this has been edifying for you. This has been quite the project for me, obviously. Quite a lot of recording to do. I did this in 2 days, so that's quite a lot of hours to spend, and I'm very grateful to spend them because this is a very important topic that touches on so many things. And hopefully it's edified you. Hopefully it will edify your friends. Took a lot of research to do. I'll remind you that my notes, my presentation notes, and my references will be on the website, including the pronunciation guides that we went over today. I don't consider myself an expert pronouncer of the Hebrew names, but the point is to know what it's not, so that these sacred name people can be refuted. So share this with your friends so they can be edified. A lot of people are being deceived by the sacred name stuff, but now you won't be one of them. Take care and God bless.